BlackRock isn't waiting for a dip. They're creating the dip and they're buying off that dip. Guys, today I want to talk about Bitcoin spot ETF flows and the supply shock fears that everyone's talking about on social media. So what you see on the screen is the total Bitcoin spot ETF net inflows. As expected, the week of the 7th to the 11th of April, for all that tariff news, there was a lot of selling, a lot of outflows. But this past week, we've seen a bit of a recovery, and you'll notice in the IBIT column, which is BlackRock, they've been pretty busy this past week. From Monday to Thursday, they've bought $185 million in Bitcoin. That's being contrasted by some serious selling by Fidelity and ARK. But all in all, across all ETFs, there's been a net inflow of about $12 million in Bitcoin. So it's been kind of stable. If you compare it to the previous week, we saw about $700 million outflow of Bitcoin across all ETFs. So the past week has been a marked improvement from the week of the 7th to the 11th of April. The next chart I want to show you is also on CoinGlass, and it highlights the Bitcoin exchange balances across all exchanges. And I'm just showing you this to highlight the subject of the supply shock that's happening in the market right now. There may be differing reports across different websites, but there's a general consensus that there's about 2.18 million Bitcoin left on all exchanges. This chart is specifically showing you the past 2 years, and you can see about Jan 2024 we had about 2.71 million Bitcoin on exchanges. Today we've got 2.18 million, and that's pretty much the lowest we've ever seen in this market. So it's the hardest it's ever been for retail investors like you and me to buy Bitcoin off exchanges. And that obviously drives the price up. The next thing I wanted to show you is Google Trends, and I specifically looked at the search term Bitcoin. And firstly, take a look at November through to Jan, high trending search by retail investors, and take a look at the levels right now, 32, which matches the figures that we were having around about the end of October. But remember, end of October, Bitcoin was at about $66,000. Right now, it's at $85,000 with the same interest in retail investors. What am I trying to say there? Well, BlackRock is buying $185 million worth of Bitcoin at such a low interest by retail investors. Yet when Bitcoin was at 100 and over, retail investors were the most interested they ever have been. That also tells me that investment management companies like BlackRock are selling at points where retail investors are really interested, and then they're taking all of that Bitcoin back when there's a lull in interest by retail investors. So don't make that mistake. The next thing I wanted to chat about is the comment that the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, had to say at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He reckons that Bitcoin could reach $700,000 if there is more fear of currency debasement and economic instability. He says that Bitcoin is a hedge against currency debasement and political instability. But the other thing that he said that raised the most attention was that he was talking about Bitcoin digitizing gold and making crypto in general more democratized and much cheaper for investors. But from where I'm standing, by taking all the Bitcoin off the market, they're actually making Bitcoin a lot more expensive for investors. So BlackRock's been around for 37 years. Larry Fink was one of the co-founders 37 years ago. They've got $11.55 trillion assets under management as of 2024. Trust me guys, these guys know what they're doing. Based on what we're seeing here, do you think BlackRock is forward-thinking while the average retail investor is still hesitating? We've entered the phase where institutions don't buy the dips, they create them. If you're still waiting for 50K or 40K, you may be waiting forever. And that reminds me of something Didi Taihuttu said. If you don't know who Didi is, he is an entrepreneur who's originally from the Netherlands. Back in 2013, a friend of his suggested that they started mining Bitcoin. After a major life event, he realized that all the material things he had didn't mean much to him anymore. He had this Bitcoin that he had mined that grew in value, and he decided that he was going to sell everything he has, property, cars, into Bitcoin, pack up and leave and live in Thailand. I've started following him lately. His perspectives are very refreshing. He's a very humble guy. He's quite a funny guy too. But all of this reminds me of something that he said in an interview where he's really worried about these large ETFs and government buying up Bitcoin, because we're going to land up in a situation where all these large organizations are going to control us again if we move over to Bitcoin as a reserve currency. So he's really worried that this technology that was supposed to free the small guys like you and me is actually going to be controlled by these large organizations, and we'll be back to where we were. But I'll leave a link of this interview that he had explaining his entire story and a link to his channel. I think it's really interesting how he created this concept of a Bitcoin family that travels the world, doesn't own anything, and just rents wherever they stay. And even though he has all his money, he lives a minimalist life. Anyways, guys, let me know if you're still on the sidelines. Comment on the video on what you think the next Bitcoin price target is. Like the video, and please, I'd really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. See you next time.